Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
We now have the invocation by Lieutenant Dr. Wayne Algar, United States Navy retired.
Our Father in heaven, as we begin this celebration of appreciation to our veterans, we bow our heads in prayer before Thee to acknowledge Thy hand in the creation and the safekeeping of this great land in which we dwell. We're so grateful for those who have had to go to war in defense of this freedom, and especially those heroes who have given their lives in our behalf, and those also who have returned from war with various injuries, both mental and psychological, and we pray that Thou wilt bless them, that they might be healed and soothed and be able to be accepted and loved by those of us for whom they fought. We ask Thee to bless us, that we might live our lives in such a way that they would be proud of us in appreciating the great liberty that we have. And finally, we ask Thee to bless the leaders of nations, that they might seek for peace, that we might have little or no need for war in the future. This is our prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Welcome to the 2011 Veterans Day Parade, and I want to echo what Debbie said, thanking all of you for coming out. We are here to recognize and salute all our veterans, as well as the active men and women currently serving around the world, with a special recognition and expression of gratitude to those serving in the combat zones in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere in the Near East. We are really privileged today. We have on stage, I'm not going to do the bios, but on stage we have a World War II veteran. We have a veteran of the Korea and Vietnam Wars. We have an individual who was a POW in North Korea on the USS Pueblo. We have Rosie the Riveters, who did a great job during World War II. Also, we have the founder of the Soldiers List, Michelle McIntyre Brewer, who's in the, to my right in the last row, who a couple of weeks ago received the second highest civilian award, the Presidential Citizens Medal, for her work. USA! 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 Thank you, and God bless you.
And now introduce the Grand Marshal, Chip. Walter S. Stahl, Jr., Gunny Sergeant, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. Give me a big hand for Walter. also known as my boyfriend.
Every day I get news clips about defense primarily. I noticed one recently noted that less than 1% of American families are directly involved in these wars, in spite of the fact that we're now fighting 2 wars. I and a few others here lived through during the last war where all of America was at war. That was World War II. You knew you were at war. Everything was rationed. Grease was rationed. Gasoline was rationed. Tire was rationed. Not a single new car was built, as far as I know, in 43, 44, and 45. But it's so easy for the rest of us. Life is good. The sun is shining. To not remember that this less than 1% of our families are directly involved in a war. And a large number of our brave young men and women are putting their lives at risk so that we can be here today. You know, Debbie mentioned this was, as far as she knew, the only Veterans Day parade in Maryland. And I've been blessed now for nearly 20 years to represent a really patriotic district. And Brunswick kind of is the cream on top of that. Thank you all very much. You could be somewhere else today. Thank you for coming out and recognizing.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, and thank everybody for showing up today as we honor not just those serving today, those who will serve in the future, but my father's generation, those who served in the past. I bring greetings on behalf of the delegation. I saw Senator Young show up. Ron Young's here. We have Delegate Afzali. We have Delegate Huff and Delegate Kelly Schultz. Now, Kelly, I can also say that Kelly is the one member of the delegation whose son Brandon is now training for Special Forces. And I know she's very proud of him, and we all are. But you know, this is what we go back to Annapolis to say we're so excited to represent. And the celebration that we're holding here in honor of the past and also of the future and of all the freedoms that we have today really means a tremendous amount. And I tell you, when we get the opportunity to go back to Annapolis, to be able to say this is our community, because we are one big community here. And you know, all the elements of it that we get to speak for and to advocate for. This really is an honor. On behalf of the delegation, I thank you. On behalf of the legislature of Maryland, I extend my greetings and thank you too.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. This is part of my district that I'm proud to represent, and it was always my mother's favorite town. I spent a lot of time here, going back to Patsy Cline, but it's an honor to be here to pay tribute to the veterans, again, those serving, those that have served, and those that will serve, and I hope that someday we can bring them all home and rebuild our own country and take care of them and take care of each other the way we should. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Chip. Chip's like the professional MC of Frederick County, and I don't know who's beloved better in Brunswick, Patsy Cline or Debbie Williams. So, and this Brunswick wind might be the only wind that actually makes my hair move today. Brunswick's a special place in my heart too. I love coming down here for different reasons. Of course, I love the moose and the elks, the eagles and the now opened American Legion. The Brunswick Veterans Day Parade is one of the oldest Veterans Day parade in Maryland and in the United States. And as you've heard, is one of the few communities that still continues to celebrate in this fashion to honor our veterans. On behalf of the Board of County Commissioners, myself, the Vice President of the Board, Paul Smith, County Commissioner Billy Shreve, County Commissioner David Gray, County Commissioner Kirby DeLauder, who is a veteran who served this country. We would like to personally thank you, Mayor Jones, and the Town Council for continuing this tradition now for 79 years. I've often recited this poem at several events that I've been that have honored veterans. If you understand the Constitution, which I know that Congressman Bartlett's probably carrying one. He usually always carries his Constitution. You have it today? Right there it is. If you understand the fact that we're a republic, you'll understand this poem. This poem is from Father Dennis Edward O'Brien, who served the United States Marine Corps. He was not the author. He quickly admits that, but the author is unknown. It is the soldier, not the reporter, who has given us freedom of the press. It is the soldier, not the poet, who has given us freedom of speech. It is the soldier, not the campus organizer, who has given us the freedom to demonstrate. It is the soldier, not the lawyer, who has given us the right to a fair trial. It is the soldier who salutes the flag, who serves beneath the flag, and whose coffin is draped by the flag, who allows the protester to burn the flag. God bless you, and it's an honor and privilege being here today. Thank you.
Well said. And we're proud of them. That's it. They need a standing ovation. Elizabeth Butler. Hey, Elizabeth. God bless you. Dorothy Davenport. Yay. Gloria Farmer. Gloria McCorgick. She's not here either. Dorothy May. Hi, Dorothy.
I've had a chance in the last couple of hours to meet a fair number of you, so I'm not near as nervous as I would have been otherwise. So I've got a few things I'd like to say today, starting with each year on Memorial Day, we honor those who gave the supreme sacrifice and died in service to our country. But today, however, I'd like to take just a few minutes to recognize and honor all those who served, came home to our communities, and who we proudly recognize as veterans. 236 years ago, General George Washington assembled a group of American citizens to take up arms and fight for the right of American colonialists to be independent from the oppression of a foreign government. When that Revolutionary War ended and gave us the freedoms that we take for granted today, those patriots returned to their farms and homes and became the first military veterans in our history. Who would have bet that that group of upstart colonists with few resources and even less of an army could have defeated the British Army? But they did, and the fabric of a new country was created. Even more important, however, the tradition of protecting our American way of life by calling on citizens to be a part of a strong military in both war and peace was instilled in our country. Over the next 100 years, America repeatedly called on its citizens to take up arms and fight in numerous conflicts around the world. Our military engaged, for example, in the War of 1812, the Mexican Wars, the Indian Wars, and sadly our own Civil War. And in 1917 came the World War I, which was once called the war to end all wars. Sadly, it did not end all wars. However, out of that war came the day that we commemorate here today. In the years that followed, the armistice, which was declared on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, when the armistice was declared between the Allied forces in Germany. Armistice Day was commemorated every year thereafter. In 1938, November 11th became a federal holiday dedicated to remembering both the sacrifices and the resolve of all veterans of all previous wars. When our country was forced into World War II, millions of Americans were once again called to defend our nation, both on the home front and on battlefields across the globe. I know some of you here today were part of that generation that Tom Brokaw in his book called the greatest generation. Every World War II veteran, and there are a number of you here, I met two of you this morning earlier, will remember that when they were discharged, they were issued a small lapel pin showing an eagle inside a wreath. In their rush to get out of the military and back to their homes and factories and farms and jobs, one official once said they took off like a bunch of ruptured ducks. And ever since, those millions of American World War II veterans have proudly referred to their lapel pin as their ruptured duck. World War II changed the face of our country. Those young men and women who were veterans, now veterans, they matured far quicker than their age would have dictated. And they didn't want to return to the life that their fathers and grandfathers had done. They'd seen the world, they'd grown up, they had acquired maturity and skills, and they weren't ready to go back to the hard life of their fathers. Since World War II, our country has been forced to repeatedly call on its young men and women, time and time again, to help protect the liberties and the values and the way of life that all those veterans who came before them had put in place. In 1954, Congress changed the name of Armistice Day to Veterans Day to more appropriately honor veterans from all wars. We still have our forces in Korea, in Europe, and our forces have been to Grenada and Persian Gulf and Bosnia and Somalia and Afghanistan and Iraq. My own overseas service was all in the Pacific. I served in Korea at the end of that conflict, then spent 2 years in Japan, and my oldest son, who was born there, still doesn't think it's funny when I tell people that he was made in Japan. But he gets over it. But the signal event of my military career was serving 2 years flying helicopters in Vietnam, where I first commanded an aviation company and later on a second tour, an aviation battalion. I flew the Huey, which became the iconic symbol of the war in Vietnam. The Army brought nearly 10,000 Hueys to Vietnam in the course of the 8 years of that war, and nearly half of them, by the way, were either lost to combat missions or accidents. Most of those Hueys were flown by young men right out of high school or fresh from enlisted ranks who went through rigorous flight training, were then appointed as warrant officer aviators, and sent directly to Vietnam. Those young aviators and their crews performed flight missions, in many cases so hazardous that it was difficult to believe the bravery and professionalism that they brought to their jobs. But when our Vietnam veterans came home, they were shamefully treated by factions of the American public. If nothing else good came out of the Vietnam War, one thing certainly did. It was the lessons that our country learned about how not to treat our warriors when they come home from war. Our veterans coming home today from Iraq and Afghanistan are the beneficiaries of those sad lessons learned over 40 years ago. We still have thousands of young men and women serving in our military services who continue to exhibit outstanding leadership and professionalism throughout our military forces. But for every professional military person, there are hundreds of thousands of veterans who served their country, chose to leave the service, and become productive citizens in their communities. For every man and woman who's worn the uniform, they leave the service with a deep understanding of the respect, the order, the uniformity, the accountability, and the dedication that they learned in the military, and which becomes part of their marrow and never leaves them. Whether they'll admit it or not, most veterans miss the little things that they took for granted when they were in the ranks. Things like the sound of boot heels thumping on an asphalt street, the bark of a drill instructor, and the sing-song answers from the ranks and formation as they pass in review. And they miss being a small cog in a complex worldwide machine, yet still knowing that that machine will feed everyone on time, 3 times a day, on the ground, in the air, and at sea. Some will even say they miss the hurry up and wait that enlisted men griped about constantly, but which bonded them to each other more than they would ever know. I don't know anyone that's ever been in the military who regrets it and doesn't feel that sense of pride in that orderly world that they left behind. Their service shaped their life. When they come home as veterans, they bring with them an inner knowledge that they're now better men and women than they were before their term of service. They're more mature, more worldly, more disciplined, more organized, and more proud of themselves, and more ready to take on the challenges of making a living for themselves and those who depend on them. We seldom hear the stories of the thousands of veterans who served their country in hundreds of jobs that never involved heroism, but without which the machinery of the military could not operate. Those thousands of unsung heroes who served their time in the military without any special recognition, without any homecoming parades, without any medals, without any notice by their country except for the families that they come home to when they were serving in places like Lackland, Subic Bay, Fort Dix, Baghdad, and 1,000 other postings. They came home to real American towns, just like Frederick, Martinsburg, Middletown, Shepherdstown, and Brunswick. These veterans are the very real people in our everyday walk of life in our communities. For over 235 years, American men and women have been coming home after serving their country, and they are now proudly recognized as veterans. One recent estimate said that there are about 23.5 million living American veterans in our country today. And some of that 23.5 million will be lining the streets for the parade in their honor in less than an hour. Today on Veterans Day, we recognize and honor and celebrate the contributions of all those who served in our military and returned to our communities. These people are our neighbors and our friends. You may not think of them as veterans, but they're people like your city manager, some on your police force, your firefighters, your doctor, your railroad station crews, and maybe even your local antique store owner, all of whom collectively make our communities and our country so great. So let me leave you with this thought about who a veteran really is. A veteran is someone who at one point in their life wrote a blank check made payable to the United States of America for an amount up to and including their life. We are grateful that the United States of America did not have to cash that check for our veterans here today. I want to thank the Brunswick Veterans Day Committee for giving me the honor of helping recognize the contributions of all veterans. Thank you, Brunswick. And to all of you veterans here today, America salutes you. But I'm here to tell you about an event in which I was involved back in 1968. It was the illegal seizure of the U.S. Navy ship Pueblo. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not. I don't know if it's making it into the history books. But the USS Pueblo was, at the time, probably the smallest commissioned vessel in the United States Navy. It was configured to look like and act like a Russian-built trawler. But we were not trawling for fish, as the Russians were not. We were trawling for information. And we were sent off the coast of North Korea for reasons to this day I do not know. My crew is configured to conduct intelligence collection operations against the old Soviet Union, who were not our best friends back in the 1960s. This was the raging of the Cold War. USS Pueblo set out on the Sea of Japan in January of 1968, sent off the coast of North Korea, which was quite a challenge because we didn't have a lot of information to go on to conduct our operations off their coast. North Korea was a mystery and still is kind of a mystery to most of us. But we were sent there in the dead of winter when not much was going on, and we found this to be, in the beginning, a very uneventful trip. My job, by the way, was to be in charge of the electronic intelligence collection operation. And that was the reason for the ship's existence. We were not a warship per se. We had a couple of machine guns mounted on at the last minute to defend us against, I don't know, whatever Navy came along to give us a hard time. So when we were in the third week of our patrol off the coast of North Korea, we didn't see too much going on. We were sighted by a couple of fishing vessels, but we didn't know that really meant anything. We considered ourselves to be detected, was the word in those days. So we filed some routine reports on the air. We had remained on radio silence for that part of the mission. But having been detected, we could now send our message traffic back to Japan and Washington, D.C., or wherever it had to go. The next day, we found ourselves confronted by a North Korean submarine chaser who didn't know who we were, but somebody had identified us as a U.S. Navy ship, probably the two fishing vessels, and that they should come out and investigate. So the one ship showed up. The captain called me to the bridge and asked me to identify the electronic equipment that was on board that ship, the type of radar and so forth that they had. And I did so, but we observed that the crew was in battle dress. As we would say in the Navy, they were at general quarters. General quarters is a condition in which you are prepared to fight. It wasn't long before some of his friends arrived, a total of 5 or 6 high-performance patrol craft, but heavily armed, and a couple of old MiG-15s overhead. They sent a signal by flag, international flag hoist, to tell the captain to stop the ship. In the old seafaring term, it was heave to, which means stop your ship by heading up into the wind. Well, we felt that it was not comfortable to stop the ship, so he tried to get us out of there as fast as we could. Now, the Pueblo was an old converted Army light cargo ship. In fact, it once belonged to South Korea. They didn't want it anymore, so they gave it back. And it sat and rusting away in the shipyard outside of San Francisco until it was reactivated in 1967. So we did not have much to fight with. It wasn't a combatant vessel. The North Koreans did open fire, and we knew that an incident was about to begin. They had us pretty much surrounded, and it was the captain's decision to surrender the ship because we really didn't have a way of defending ourselves. But he
held that off as long as he possibly could so we could destroy some of the classified, or as much of the classified material as we had on board that we could destroy. Unfortunately, we were not 100% successful. And finally, the North Koreans boarded our ship and took over. This was the first time since the War of 1812 that a U.S. Navy ship had been captured. And it was a sad day for us. When they came on board, I tried to get away with my most important possession, I felt, at that particular time, and that was my Bible. And I had made a rather large bulge in my jacket, but one of the North Koreans came up to me and made a motion with his bayonet point saying that he wanted that. For all he knew, I had a weapon under there, a grenade, a handgun, whatever I would use against him. And imagine his surprise when he found it was a book, a black book. But that book, as it says within its cover, was more powerful than any two-edged sword, which would have been a very formidable weapon at the time the Bible was written, in the early centuries and millennia of civilization. But the book was gone. I was not to see it again. We were taken ashore in the port of Wonsan in North Korea, right on the border of South Korea. But we were blindfolded, our wrists were bound. We were taken aboard buses and then on a train, and we commenced an all-night ride through the mountains of North Korea in January. All I can recall of that journey was, if they're going to do us in, they're sure taking us a long way. We arrived at a large railway station. The blindfolds came off. We were met with a blaze of lights and motion picture cameras and still cameras flashing away. I had guessed, they wouldn't confirm anything for a long time, we were in the city of Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. They took us through the streets of the city to our first place of imprisonment, and I still can recall in the early morning hours, just before sunrise, the drab, dull architecture of a country that was in under totalitarian rule. Everything planned centrally, everything falling apart at about the same rate. We arrived at our first place of imprisonment. We were greeted by two lines of troops facing each other, and we had to pass between them, and they took their jollies at knocking us around a bit. This was our welcome to North Korea. This was their entertainment. This was a preview of the kind of thing we could expect for the next several months. Only at that point, we didn't know it was going to be an 11-month captivity. We were taken inside, split up into groups of 4, and we just waited for what we didn't know. One of the guards came out and got me. He identified this time as one of the 6 officers of the ship. We were taken down to a room where present were North Korean military personnel, mostly officers with the Army General presiding, or we guessed it was. We didn't know the rank structure and the collar devices of North Korea because we didn't expect to get inside the country, nor did we want to, nor did we ask to. The room looked like a courtroom from the way it was arranged, and we found out very quickly that for us it was. We were to be placed on trial right then, right there. The general's interpreter said, "You are charged with having intruded the U.S. armed imperialist spy ship Pueblo deep into the territorial waters of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and you've committed hostile acts therein. How do you plead?" Well, it was not their plan for us to be found innocent, but we pleaded not guilty, and I'll tell you why. And this is a point that is not often well made. At no time had the USS Pueblo ever been in the territorial waters of North Korea. It was always on the high seas. So what the North Koreans did was to commit not just an act of piracy, but an act of war against the United States. But things are done according to a central plan under a communist system, And the plan was for us to be found guilty. So we listened in horror as the general's interpreter said, "We find that the entire Pueblo crew is guilty. The punishment is death. All 82 of you will be executed by firing squad today at sunset. Youngest man first, while the commanding officer will watch and be the last to be executed." There's nothing like a death sentence to ruin your day. Now, obviously, it wasn't carried out, but it was just as real as if it was going to be. And I shared this information, and it wasn't too well received by the 3 other guys that were in the room, the cell, if you want to put it that way, where I was. It wasn't really a prison, it was a barracks type building. And they reacted with the same kind of horror. I mean, it hadn't even sunk in with me yet. But I realized that these are the last 3 human beings I might even see alive. So I shared with them my personal faith, that I'm a Bible-believing Christian, and that heaven was a possibility for them if they would just turn their lives over to the Lord, and they would be guaranteed that place with heaven. Don't know what those men decided. They were still in terror. Everything was confused. We waited for sunset. It did not, sunset occurred, but the execution did not. We waited till sunrise. No execution. Then they started issuing us personal items, toiletries, toothbrush, comb, soap, that sort of thing. Not the kind of things that a man who is scheduled to die would expect to receive. So the execution was off. Now, we can debate all day long as to whether it was scheduled in the first place. All I know is we were spared, and it was very real. Now followed the 11 months of torture, brutality, confession, interrogation, all of that stuff that you can read about in the many books that have come out on the subject. That just doesn't really add anything to the story. We were kept there for that 11-month period, and it was a time of boredom for the most part, you know, boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror, as they say. But, and a couple of interesting things happened while we were there. There were some press conferences. There were very interesting press conferences. We were supposedly telling our story to the outside world, but the North Koreans were saying, well, now, you know, these reporters, they're kind of a hostile bunch, you know. So we found out the questions that they're going to ask you in the press conferences. So that was very kind of them to give us the questions in advance. But they were even more kind. They gave us the answers to the questions that we were going to have to deal with. That's freedom of the press, North Korean style. They took a lot of pictures of us while we were there for local propaganda purposes, and one became very famous. And here it is on a Sunday afternoon where I'll be talking about this, and I hope the Lord will forgive me for this, but one particular picture made it into Time magazine. It was a picture of a certain gesture that the gentlemen in our crew were making, and it was not, as we claimed, the Hawaiian good luck sign. So we found out the North Koreans had a subscription to Time magazine, and they were highly angry at us because we had caused them to lose face, that they didn't know what this little gesture with the finger meant. So they made our lives miserable. And in December of 1968, it looked like the end, but not the end that we wanted. This time they were angry with us, bones were breaking, blood was flowing, our survival was on the line. But we were praying that we would be home for Christmas of 1968. And if you saw the conditions that we were in, you'd say, there's no way this is going to happen. But we continued in the prayer anyway. Suddenly, all the beatings stopped. We were hastily gathered together. The general in charge of the prison said to us, we now find that you are repentant and sincere. These are favorite lines that they had in North Korea. And they said to us, without hardly pausing to take a breath, The United States has agreed to sign a document which will permit your release. This was after the 1968 elections, and they were still kind of hedging their bets over there. They said, we don't know whether this will happen during the Johnson administration or the Nixon administration. Well, to make a long story a little less too long than it's getting, we were out of there that night on a train headed south. Man, in North Korea, that's the only direction in which to travel. And we were met at the border, at the bridge of no return at Panmunjom by members of U.S. military, all services. And by the way, the date was December 23rd, 1968, exactly 11 months from the day we were captured. And the next day, we flew out of South Korea, crossed over the international date line, but it was dark out, so we didn't see it when we looked down. But anyway, we arrived in San Diego the morning of Christmas Eve. We were home for Christmas, back to the greatest nation on the face of the earth, in my view, in answer to a specific prayer. And thank you, veterans, for welcoming us here today. A lot of you have undergone more terror than I have, but it was really great to be back in the United States of America, the greatest country that there ever was. Thank you very much for your time.
Commander, thank you, and thank you for your service to our country. Thank you, sir.
I think it is. I think so. I'm going to do two things here today. First of all, I want you to close your eyes and say, we are blessed. I am blessed. You are blessed. We are blessed that there are enough women to tell us our story, the fuller story of World War II and what they did to shorten that terrible war. Just on the count of two, close your eyes a minute and think about how blessed we are that most of these stories were not gotten, and we barely have time today to get them, and we're going to get them.